Mr. President, members of the court, good morning. I will focus on Myanmar's violations of the court's unanimous order on provisional measures dated 23 January 2020. As the court recalled in that order, quote, orders on provisional measures under Article 41 of the statute have binding effect and thus create international legal obligations for any party to whom the provisional measures are addressed, which in this case, of course, is Myanmar. I will discuss Myanmar's violations of the first three provisional measures. The Gambia does not argue that Myanmar has violated the court's fourth provisional measure, which relates to the filing of reports on the implementation of the provisional measures order. On that point, however, I do note that Myanmar's reports have tended to include much information that is irrelevant to the implementation of the order itself. To help assist the court, the Gambia will focus here only on information relevant to the violation of the measures themselves. The first provisional measure relates to the prevention of genocide. Myanmar must, quote, in relation to the members of the Rohingya group in its territory, take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention, in particular, A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. Myanmar thus has been under an obligation since 23 January 2020 to take all measures within its powers to prevent the commission of all of the actus reus of genocide listed in Article 2 of the Convention, particularly sections A through D. Myanmar has failed to comply with this provisional measure. In relation to Article 2, A and B, killings and causing serious bodily or mental harm, members of the Rohingya group have been killed or injured as a result of the military's activities in Rakhine State after the court's order. For example, according to the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar, quote, from 23 January 2020 to 22 January 2021, at least 33 Rohingya civilians were killed as a result of the conflict, with at least 39 others injured. In the year following the ICJ's provisional measures order, 19 Rohingya men, women, and children were killed as a result of targeted or indiscriminate attacks by the Myanmar military. 1 was killed in a targeted killing by police, 10 were killed as a result of landmines or unexploded ordnance, and 2 were killed in targeted killings by other unidentified armed groups. The 33 killed included 15 children and 3 women. In addition to the killings of Rohingya by the Myanmar military, scores more were injured as a result of incidents similar to those described above, and Rohingya are among the thousands of people who have been internally displaced by the conflict, end quote. According to reports of the UN Special Rapporteur in 2024 and 2025, Rohingya civilians have been killed and displaced by Myanmar military shelling and attacks in the context of its armed conflict with the Arsalan army. Additionally, in the context of that same conflict with the Arsalan army, the Myanmar military has forcibly conscripted Rohingya into military service, exposing them directly to killing in the conflict. According to a September 2025 report of the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, quote, throughout the ground offensives in 2024, the military relied heavily on Rohingya forced recruits. Scores, possibly hundreds, of those men and boys recruited by the military remain unaccounted for, with many feared killed on the battlefield. Since the military announced the initiation of a conscription process in February 2024, over 5,000 Rohingya are reported to have been conscripted in the period up to June 2025, with this practice continuing into July 2025 in Sitwe IDP camps and villages and Kyak Phu, prompting many to flee Rakhine. Information received indicated that only those who could pay military and camp leaders could avoid recruitment. Rohingya men who resisted recruitment risked being arrested, beaten, extorted, threatened, and detained. Conscripted Rohingya continued to be deployed at military bases and checkpoints, with the military extorting money from Rohingya families in Sitwe camps to support families of the recruits, exacerbating the already dire financial conditions. Credible reports indicate that many forcibly recruited Rohingya men from Sitwe camps in June and July were sent to fight the Arakan army in the ongoing battles in Kyak Phu, and families have lost contact with them, with their whereabouts unknown. Hundreds of Rohingya youths have fled camps and villages to avoid conscription." End quote. The UN Special Rapporteur reported that these conscripts were forced to serve as, quote, human shields. The reports of forced conscription were confirmed by the UN High Commissioner, Human Rights Watch, and independent media. The International Crisis Group reported that thousands of Rohingya are likely forcibly serving in the Myanmar military as, quote, cannon fodder. Quote, "Desperate to hold on to power, the military regime has sought to foment intercommunal tensions, rallying some Rohingya to its side through a mix of coercion and inducements. Although authorities in Myanmar have long persecuted the Rohingya, including by denying citizenship to the vast majority of them and constraining their freedom of movement, the military has no qualms about using them as cannon fodder against the Arakan army. Facing the prospect of further defeats in Rakhine, the regime has conscripted Rohingya men from villages across the state's north, where the Rohingya still make up most of the population, and from internment camps near Sitwe, where some 130,000 continue to live after being forcibly displaced following the 2012 violence. Thousands of Rohingya are now likely serving in the Myanmar military as militia members," end quote. The UN Special Rapporteur and independent media investigations also reported that the Myanmar military forced Rohingya to protest against the Arakan army in Sitwe and elsewhere in Rakhine State, further inflaming communal tensions and placing Rohingya in danger of physical harm. The International Crisis Group corroborated that reporting and further reported that Myanmar has collaborated with ARSA to further inflame tensions. Quote, "In an effort to stoke intercommunal tensions, to destabilize its opponent, the regime has also coerced Rohingya into staging demonstrations against the Arakan army and collaborated with Rohingya armed groups, particularly the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, the outfit whose attacks provided the pretext for the 2017 crackdown, and which the military has long designated a terrorist organization," end quote. As intended, Myanmar's forced conscription practices have inflamed communal tensions between Rohingya and Rakhine communities. According to an October 2025 report of the UN Special Rapporteur, quote, "Junta forces have forcibly recruited thousands of Rohingya men and boys, many of whom have been deployed to the front lines of the fight against the Arakan army or used as human shields. Rohingya recruits have also been ordered to attack Rakhine civilian populations and destroy Rakhine property, escalating tensions between Rakhine and Rohingya populations, end quote. Because of the military's intentionally provocative actions, the Arakan army retaliated with attacks that have caused killings of Rohingya civilians and destruction of some of their villages in Buthadong Township, displacing thousands. Clearly, rather than taking all measures within its powers to prevent killings and serious bodily or mental harm to members of the Rohingya group, Myanmar has been doing the opposite, in violation of the court's provisional measures order. Pursuant to the court's order, Myanmar should have taken also all measures within its powers to prevent the deliberate infliction on the group of conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. That has not happened. The UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar detailed the systematic nature of the discrimination that Rohingya continue to experience in Myanmar in his report of 1 July 2024. Quote, "The estimated 600,000 Rohingya who remain in Myanmar suffer under an apartheid regime enforced by the military. They face rigid segregation, severe restrictions on movement and access to education, healthcare, and employment, arbitrary arrest and detention, confinement to squalid IDP camps, and vulnerability to violence from armed actors and civilians. Since the coup, the already repressive environment for Rohingya in Myanmar has worsened. The SAC, which stands for State Administrative Council, has imposed new movement restrictions on Rohingya in Rakhine State and systematically blocked humanitarian aid deliveries and organizational access, cutting off Rohingya communities from life-saving aid. Rohingya also face a rapidly deteriorating security situation as they are increasingly caught in the crossfire of fighting between the SAC and Arakan army. Since May 2024, thousands of Rohingya living in northern Rakhine State have been displaced from their homes with serious concerns about their safety, security, and access to food and shelter," end quote. In his report to the UN Human Rights Council on 13 June 2020, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar explained how the cascading layers of discriminatory policies lead to preventable deaths for Rohingya. Quote, "The roughly 600,000 Rohingya in Rakhine State continue to have their rights systematically violated. More than 130,000 remain confined to IDP camps, and even those living in villages are denied the right to move freely. Most villagers need to apply for permission to travel between localities in Rakhine State, a system that is enforced at checkpoints manned by security forces throughout the region. Since the coup, Rohingya have faced renewed arrest for undocumented travel. Travel restrictions and nighttime curfews can have life and death consequences, especially for those seeking treatment for acute medical conditions. An outbreak of diarrhea in Rohingya IDP camps that began in January 2022 has led to deaths that could have been prevented by timely medical treatment," end quote. Year after year, hundreds of Rohingya are arrested and imprisoned for, quote, "unauthorized travel within Myanmar." The dire conditions in Rakhine State have led thousands of Rohingya to attempt to flee these conditions by sea, resulting in tragic deaths every year. Hundreds of them. The Myanmar military has also restricted food supplies and the resulting food scarcity situation has reached emergency levels and is contributing to health emergencies as well. According to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, quote, food scarcity across Rakhine has reached emergency levels, with deaths, disease, and malnutrition reported throughout the state. In northern Rakhine, the situation is acute, with most Rohingya surviving on a single meal a day. Internally displaced persons in those areas have been living in makeshift shelters or the homes of other Rohingya families, unable to access food, water, and sanitation. In central Rakhine, where as many as 70% of Rohingya IDPs in certain camps may be at risk of starvation, reports of suicides and attempted suicides due to hunger were also received. In these desperate humanitarian conditions, disease is rampant, with cases of acute watery diarrhea, scabies, hepatitis, malaria, and dengue fever reported, end quote. Rather than allow food aid in, the Myanmar military burned a World Food Program warehouse. According to the UN Special Rapporteur, quote, in June 2024, junta soldiers looted and set fire to a World Food Program warehouse holding 1,175 metric tons of food aid, an amount that could have fed more than 60,000 people for a month, end quote. Access to adequate health care in northern Rakhine State continues to deteriorate, leading to preventable deaths. According to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, quote, the availability and accessibility of healthcare services continue to decline, with numerous reports received of preventable deaths of children and displaced persons due to the absence of basic services and assistance, end quote. Due to the restrictive environment imposed by the military, Médecins Sans Frontières, the only healthcare provider for Rohingya in many parts of Rakhine State, suspended its operations there in June 2024. Rather than taking all measures within its powers to prevent the deliberate infliction on the Rohingya group of conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, Myanmar has made the situation worse. The second provisional measure, which relates to the non-commission of acts of genocide, requires that Myanmar, quote, in relation to the members of the Rohingya group in its territory, ensure that its military, as well as any irregular armed units which may be directed or supported by it, and any organizations and persons which may be subject to its control, direction, or influence, do not commit acts of genocide or of conspiracy to commit genocide, of direct and public incitement to commit genocide, of attempt to commit genocide, or of complicity in genocide, end quote. Myanmar has failed to comply with this provisional measure as well. The evidence indicates that Myanmar's military continues to engage in various anti-Rohingya propaganda efforts that could amount to conspiracy or incitement to commit genocide. For example, on 8 October 2020, several months after the provisional measures order, Facebook announced the removal of 38 Facebook accounts, 15 pages, and 6 Instagram accounts that it determined were linked, quote, to members of the Myanmar military who had, quote, attempted to conceal their identities and coordination, end quote. Those accounts, which spread anti-Rohingya messages, reached approximately 480,000 other Facebook users. Similarly, in April 2020, Facebook was compelled to remove 3 pages, 18 accounts, and 1 group, all of which it found were linked to, quote, members of the Myanmar police force who had, quote, attempted to conceal their identities and coordination, end quote. The pages reached approximately 19,000 other Facebook users and included what Facebook characterized as anti-Rohingya content. These accounts that I'm just mentioning are separate from the accounts that were taken down by Facebook that I had discussed Monday afternoon. In July 2021, Facebook, quote, removed 79 Facebook accounts, 13 pages, 8 groups, and 19 Instagram accounts in Myanmar that targeted domestic audiences and were linked to individuals associated with the Myanmar military, end quote. Facebook found that this operation was linked to the Tatmadaw and its anti-Rohingya operations from 2018. Quote, our investigation revealed some links between this operation and the activity we removed in 2018. Although the people behind it attempted to conceal their identities and coordination, our investigation found links to individuals associated with the Myanmar military, end quote. On 24 February 2021, the Tatmadaw and military-controlled state and media entities were banned from Facebook and Instagram due in part to, quote, ongoing violations by the military and military-linked accounts and pages since the February 1 coup, including efforts to reconstitute networks of coordinated inauthentic behavior that we previously removed, and content that violates our violence and incitement and coordinating harm policies, end quote. The Myanmar military also used other means of spreading anti-Rohingya propaganda. According to an investigative report by Frontier Myanmar, the military dropped pamphlets from the air in Sagaing in 2022 to, quote, leverage offline distribution methods to spread hate speech, disinformation, and propaganda, much of it aimed at inflaming religious tensions, end quote. Another report by Myanmar Witness concluded, quote, this rhetoric encourages discontent with Muslims and anti-military groups, as seen in the 2017 Rakhine clearance operations, which targeted the Rohingya, a Muslim minority group. The narratives and patterns of behavior identified in this investigation and by the UN's probe could not only support claims that the military are dropping these pamphlets, but also, worryingly, indicate the repeat of behaviors which occurred in the lead-up to the clearance operations in the Rakhine state, end quote. As documented in a December 2021 report by the United States Institute of Peace, the Tatmadaw spread hate propaganda seeking to link the anti-coup movement to Islam and Muslims. And its military spokesperson falsely claimed that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or OIC, is arming the opposition to the junta. Independent media reports in December 2021 and January 2022 confirm the Tatmadaw's dissemination of anti-Muslim hate pamphlets, falsely claiming that, quote, the OIC is propagandizing against Buddhist people so they will turn on each other, insult the sacred religion of Buddhism, and kill monks, end quote. Some of these anti-Rohingya operations are migrating to other online platforms like Telegram, where they can spread with less visibility because of the private nature of the Telegram platform. Because the military continues to engage in various anti-Rohingya propaganda efforts that could amount to conspiracy or incitement to commit genocide, Myanmar has also violated the second provisional measure. The third provisional measure requires Myanmar to, quote, take effective measures to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of any evidence related to allegations of acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Genocide Convention." Close quote. Myanmar has manifestly failed to comply with this provisional measure. As discussed by Ms. Al-Amin yesterday, since the court's order, Myanmar has engaged in acts of village destruction and the confiscation of land, accompanied by the building of border guard police facilities on top of those lands. The IIMM's report on this issue concluded that such actions, quote, "destroyed or permanently concealed much evidence of what occurred during the 2017 clearance operations," end quote. Mr. President, members of the court, for all of the reasons just discussed, Myanmar has violated the court's provisional measures order of 23 January 2020. It must be held accountable for these breaches in addition to its breaches of the Genocide Convention. Thank you for your kind attention. This concludes my presentation. I now ask, Mr. President, that you call Professor Pierre Dargent to the podium to address the issue of the remedies and legal consequences of Myanmar's